I'm Michael Bybee, production director on World of Warcraft. I rejoined the team about a year ago. Before that, I was on the team that shipped Diablo 4, and before that, I was on the World of Warcraft team as part of the team that shipped Legion, Battle for Azeroth, and Shadowlands.
My name is George Velev. I'm a game producer working on the World of Warcraft team. Most recently, I worked on features like Hero Talents, Deep Power Bean Battleground, Rated Battleground Blitz, class updates, things of that nature. Been on the dev team for about 4 years or so, and before that, I was on the World of Warcraft QA team, testing fun things like encounters and combat.
So I first want to ask, like, this is a big expansion. Chris Metzen came back. Like, has that changed anything on your circle from a production standpoint or producing standpoint, him being back on the team, or is he more like in charge of the narrative direction?
I think the best way to think about Chris's involvement with the team is that he's a big inspiration for a lot of what we're doing. As he's come in, he's worked with our existing teams, the narrative teams and the quest design teams. He's helped them shape the story of the expansion. It's something he actually feels really passionate about, is that it's not his story. It's something that he's worked with those teams that they've created together. And actually, one of the things I think has really happened as a result of him coming back is there's way more emphasis on, let's make sure this is right, that we got to do it the right way. We got to make it awesome. And so the character stories in this expansion are plussed up. The entire overarching story of the 3-part World Soul saga we think is going to be really fantastic. And so it's more been sort of a like supercharge of what we were doing already.
So you spoke to it a little bit. You guys are doing like three. They are expansions because, like, I mean, the amount of content and War Within is huge. I can't imagine what's planned for the next two. But like, does that change the way the workflow is, the production is? Because now you're doing 3 instead of 1 expansion. Are the expansions smaller in terms of scale? Like, how are we gonna? How does it change the process when you're doing 3 instead of 1?
In a real way, it actually doesn't change the overall process. We've always worked pretty far ahead. That's always been true. The difference is that in the past, because they were sort of self-contained stories in each one, it really was actually inappropriate for us to start talking about the story of the next expansion while players hadn't even started working on this one. And so one of the big things that changed with having the World Soul Saga, something that we could announce to the world in advance, is that Chris could say, hey, this is what we're doing in the War Within. But by the way, just in the future, we're going to take you to the home of the elves in Quel'Thalas, and we're going to do something there in Midnight and kind of give people a preview of like, here's where this thing is going. And we thought about how all these pieces fit together, and stay tuned. It's going to be a wild ride.
I was going to add that the fact that we're planning, for the entire World Soul Saga is really helpful for us because, like, Buddy mentioned, we know where we're going ahead of time, and that really sort of alleviates a lot of sort of the early questions that we answer or ask ourselves during, things like pre-production.
Hero talents are a big deal in this expansion. People have been clamoring for certain classes for decades, like Dark Ranger. You can do that now. Are hero talents here to stay, or are they borrowed power mechanics for the War Within saga?
So hero talents, like a lot of our other features in the War Within, they're an evergreen system. We use that term a lot. We mean that it's going to last for multiple expansions. So yeah, they're not going anywhere. After we launch the War Within, MMO players can put their first point into hero talents. That's the point when they're really going to be part of your character for quite a long time. We're going to treat them just like we treat classes and specs. We're going to give them the love and attention that they need. If they need more polish here, if they need a redesign there down the line, all that's certainly on the table. They're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Michael, what does a production director do? I mean, you're obviously the director of production, but I'm sure it's more involved than that.
Yeah, I think a big way to think about it for folks who aren't familiar with the games industry is you can think about production generally is a little bit like a mix between project management that might exist in some other industries, and then in the film industry, the creative producer that is involved in sort of working with the talent and coordinating the work of all the different people that put a film together. And so a game producer is sort of sits in the middle there. And as production director, my job is really to actually support folks like George, make sure that he's got everything he needs, that as we're working together with the team, that the team has what they need, and really to support the project overall across all of the World Soul Saga. And I'm also responsible for WoW Classic and other things that we're doing in the World of Warcraft universe.
George, what about you? What's a big misconception about what a game producer does? Producer can be a broad term in like most industries.
It can be a broad term, and it is a broad term. In terms of misconceptions, I'm not really sure if I could point to one. I think there's a lot of variance in sort of different specialties that different game producers sort of do on the World of Warcraft team. So for example, I primarily work with a lot of design groups. So I am sort of in the thick of things when it comes to sort of talking about tuning, talking about balance, giving people the time they need to, work on things like hero talents. There's other producers who are more focused on things like art and workflow, and they do more traditional agile methodologies. So it's really, it's the amount of variance that I think some people really don't aren't really privy to that really I think lets sort of World of Warcraft production shine, because we are gifted in a lot of different ways and we all have our different sort of areas of expertise.
I mean, it's a big team. It's a big game, and I think there's a misconception. Blizzard is an intimate company, but like at the same time, there are a lot more people that work on it than just 10 people. Like it's a multitude of teams, specialists. Like you said, there's QA, there's artists, there's programmers, there's UI interface designers. It's such a big team, and I feel like people still look at you like you're a small mom and pop store sometimes, and that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, we don't like to comment exactly on the team size, but I will absolutely acknowledge, like, it is a huge undertaking. There's a lot of complexity, and especially, I said earlier that we've got a lot of expansions in the pipe all at once, and managing all of that at the same time that we're doing things like WoW Classic, and then the huge number of people across the entire company that supports that, from everybody from BattleNet to customer support through our marketing teams. It is a lot, and it's a testament to the skills of all those people that you look at from the outside, and you look at the War Within and you look at World of Warcraft, and it just feels like it's a single voice, it's a single product, it's a single team, and that we're all sort of sharing how excited we are about this experience.
So this is like probably, I mean, I've been playing for 20 years on and off with World of Warcraft, and I would say the War Within expansion is probably has so many quality of life adjustments, tunes, interface fixes. Like you guys, I thought you guys did yourself a dragonfly with all those stuff. Was there anything particularly challenging about the War Within with so many features and so many UI fixes and delves and things, hero talents being implemented to the game at one time? Because it really is gigantic.
When it comes to sort of new quality of life stuff, I can only point to, the big one, warbands. That was a huge endeavor on the engineering team. Took a lot of work. WoW has been around for a while. WoW has had code that's been around for a while. So figuring out how that works, making a lot of new things account-wide so that our players can experience, World of Warcraft on a lot of different characters was a really large endeavor. And I think, it ended up in a really good spot. In terms of like features like hero talents, that's a lot of different groups working together. It's not just designers, it's artists, it's QA, it's audio, it's encounter folks. Anytime that we make anything on the combat side, we like to make sure that all these groups are looped in, because we can't just add a new crowd control ability without telling encounters, because at the end of the day, when encounters make something, they rely on the tools in their toolbox, and those tools come from the combat team. So I think one thing that I would love to sort of stress on is that, like, whenever we make anything for World of Warcraft, it's not just a singular team, it's like groups and groups of people working together to make it as good as it can be.
Yeah, and I will add, since it's probably not the obvious thing to talk about, what I actually want to plus up is the user interface changes that are going into the expansion. One of my favorite things is being able to actually click on, in the map now, we've changed up the icons, tried to make them a lot more clear, tried to have icons that designate different kinds of activities, because there's a lot of things you can do in World of Warcraft, and the map was starting to get cluttered. So we change the icons. We actually have some tech behind the scenes that tries to smartly recommend things to you that are the most important for you to do when you're in capital cities. And then separate from that, we've added a whole pane of, hey, here's a legend that shows you what these things are. You've got more filter and search options. There's a ton we did to the user interface to kind of just plus it up and make it easier and cleaner. And I think that's going to really make a lot of people's lives easier.
What would you say, like, as a player, say, as someone who's played this game as a lifelonger Warcraft player, what do you think is the biggest thing that people might glance over that took a lot of energy that people might not realize out of the gate? Like, obviously warbands, huge thing, right? But what's something else you can name that took a lot of time to adjust that players might skip over or might just miss, not realize how much work goes into, like, UI, for example?
I mean, UI is a big one. Since I already talked about that, the other one I'll comment on is actually the mounts. It is so cool, I think, that we were able to take most of the mounts in the game that were flying and make them work for dynamic flight. And for most players, that's just going to feel like, hey, I've got the setting for dynamic flight. I'm using the mounts that I've had and collected for 2 decades, and they just work. Behind the scenes, though, that was a lot of work from the artists, the tech artists, the animators, to make sure that all those mounts looked good and felt good in the new flying mode, as well as which we call skywriting. And then in the if you want to switch it, you can go back to steady flight, and just make sure that all just feels seamless. And there's so much work to go into, hey, I can just press a button and it all just works and all my collection feels valuable again.
I think Michael took my answer. I think dynamic flying was definitely something that really sort of hit players, with things that they would have sort of experienced. So yeah, I think dynamic flying is something, the one where it's like a lot of work went into this and players seem to really enjoy it.
And now players want, now after you do all that work, they're like, oh my God, it's done. They're like, now we want to change different flying styles on the dynamic flight. When is that coming? And you're like, oh my God, okay, hold on.
I mean, it's valid feedback at the end of the day, you know?
No, it is.
Yeah. So, you know, it's things like that that we sort of talk about and we figure out on our end, you know, what the right time is, what feels appropriate. But in terms of like solving between that dynamic and sort of static, yeah, it's something we've talked about quite a lot on our team.
Michael, do you have a favorite class and hero talent build in the game, and why?
Oh, this is tough. I actually am going to give you two answers because I have one that I think looks the coolest, and then I have the one that I am most excited to play. I think the Void Weaver Shadow Priest is just the coolest. It's the coolest fantasy concept. I think the visuals came together really awesome. Some of the new spells are really cool looking. I just think it's fantastic, especially in an expansion where Xalatath, who George has as his background, is featured as like a prominent villain. I think it's a really cool thing. I'm going to be playing Demon Hunter as a tank. I'm super excited to spec into the Eldrachi tree for hero talents. It's going to be super fun.
George, same question.
You know, unfortunately, my guild is really disappointed because I haven't picked my main yet. I'm probably going to play a shaman, restoration shaman or holy paladin. I generally play healers, so that's kind of what I'm going to go for. I'm looking forward to Farseer shaman. I think sort of having the Farseer hero talent tree lean towards more like spiritual magic, something we haven't really done a lot before in World of Warcraft. So I'm really excited to see that sort of grow. But also, I also can't just pick one. You know, I worked on all 39 of these, so they're all like my children. But right now, my favorite is probably Farseer Shaman, with Lightsmith being the second runner-up. And I may swap to Holy Paladin. You know, time will tell.